for coming back. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're based. This is the Gender-Based Violence Core Concepts and Available Support for Nutrition Partners webinar. And we are happy to have UNICEF's support and the support of the Global Nutrition Cluster for this webinar. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Christine. Great, thank you. So we have translation available. You can access it by clicking the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. We have translation in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Ukrainian today. And we want to say a big thank you to all of the interpreters that we have with us for all of their hard work, and it is very much appreciated to have them with us. A little bit of housekeeping, please ensure that you are on mute, as well as if you have any questions, next to the globe icon on the bottom of your screen is a Q&A. We will ensure to take time for questions throughout the webinar, both through the Q&A and by allowing partners to speak in the Q&A sections when it is time. Please, into the chat, go ahead and write who you are, where you're from, etc. Introduce yourself so we all know who we all are as we spend the next hour and a half together. Next slide, please. So this is our webinar series. So we have two webinars within this series. The first is Gbv Risk Mitigation in Nutrition, and the second is in the inclusion in the HRP. So today we'll be going over the Gbv core concepts for nutrition, an incredibly important topic. Next slide, please. So this was developed through our webinar working group, our Gender and Gbv working group with the Global Nutrition Cluster Technical Alliance, the technical support team. In that group, we have UNICEF, Action Against Hunger, International Medical Corps, and our supporting donors are USAID, IrishAid, UNICEF, and CEDA. And so thanks to all of those organizations and donors. Next slide, please. So over the next hour and a half, we're going to be learning about gender-based violence risk mitigation in nutrition, and we're going to learn how to ensure the coordination, planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of essential actions for the prevention and mitigation of gender-based violence within nutrition programming. Next slide, please. Our agenda for today is the introduction, which we are having now, a presentation by Christine with UNICEF through a basic overview of Gbv risk mitigation for the nutrition sector, and then a Q&A to break it up a little bit, and then presentation 2, programmatic examples of Gbv risk mitigation in nutrition, a short presentation, presentation 3, on the Alliance technical support and what's available, how you can reach out for additional support, where to find that. A final Q&A that's a little bit longer, and then a closing. Next slide, please. We have today speaking on behalf of UNICEF, Christine Heckman. She's a gender-based violence and emergencies specialist with UNICEF, and we're very thankful to have her and her expertise here today. I am Brooke Bauer. I'm the Maternal, Infant, and Young Child Nutrition and Emergencies and Gender Advisor with the Global Nutrition Cluster Technical Alliance. And Sona Sharma, who's the Social Behavior Change Advisor, also with the Global Nutrition Cluster Technical Alliance. And now I'll hand over to Christine. She'll go ahead and walk you through the next section. So over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Can somebody just confirm that my sound is okay? Brooke, can you hear me?
Yep,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for confirming. Very excited to be here with you today. Huge thanks to the GNC Technical Alliance colleagues for this opportunity and also for the great collaboration that we've had over the past few years now, I think. I'm also joined by my colleague Pam Godoy, who is part of our UNICEF team as well. And both she and I focus on the pillar of UNICEF's Gbv programming that is risk mitigation. So working with all of the different sectors in humanitarian response to make our programming and the coordination that underpins that programming as safe and accessible as possible for women and girls. So we'll get to do a little bit of a deep dive into that. I would just like to say before I jump into the session overview that Pam and I work with all of our UNICEF-led sectors, as well as UNICEF is in the coordinating role for interagency Gbv risk mitigation across all of the sectors. And really what we've seen in the past few years is that the nutrition sector is one of the sectors, if not the sector, with kind of the most exciting momentum. I'd say when we started a few years ago, the collaboration kind of wasn't quite as clear and the entry points weren't really obvious to us. But the more we get into it, sort of the more it becomes clear and the more exciting I find it and others find it as well. So I'm really looking forward to this session with all of you. I did just want to put a little caveat out there that the material that we're going to cover is quite dense and our time is quite short. So, you know, just to give you an idea, some of this material we cover over multiple days sometimes. And right now I have, you know, less than an hour. So it will be a very surface level introduction. I'll do my best to kind of touch on the main points, give you access to the main resources. And if there are specific points that come up that we're not able to address in the Q&A or that you would be interested in, you know, maybe doing a little bit more of a deep dive on a specific topic later on, we can definitely schedule some additional sessions. So having said all that and laid the groundwork a little bit, the way we hoped to address the session, at least until I hand back over to the Technical Alliance colleagues, is just, again, giving a very general introduction to Gbv and risk mitigation for the nutrition sector, why it's important to think about Gbv in nutrition work, identifying potential risks linked to nutrition programming. We'll share some of the main tools that are available for the risk analysis component of the work, and then also share some programmatic examples of risk mitigation and direct you to where you can find some other practical tools. And now I can't change my own screen. There we go. Okay, so what is gender-based violence? I think a lot of us already have a pretty good idea of this right now. So I'm not going to do too much of an overview or a deep dive into the definition itself. But you have it there on your screen. Essentially, it's any harmful act that is perpetrated against the person's will and is based on socially ascribed gender differences between males and females. This is the Interagency Standing Committee's official definition for Gbv. Some examples that, again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with through your work or through other courses that you've taken, would be rape, sexual violence, intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, and deprivation of resources. We'll come back to that last one a little later in the presentation because it's quite important for the nutrition section and something that sometimes gets overlooked. So what do we mean by Gbv risk mitigation generally? This applies to all sectors. So it's related to but distinct from Gbv specialized programming. So when we're talking about Gbv specialized programming, or those of you who are in a coordination function, like what the Gbv subcluster does or the Gbv working group does, risk mitigation is really about what elements of Gbv prevention or increasing safety that we can penetrate into the other sectors. So it's complementary but different from from GBV specialized programming, which is a lot more focused on, kind of service provision, responding to survivors' needs, and primary prevention. Risk mitigation aims to make programming across all sectors as safe and accessible as possible for women and girls. I'm having trouble with that phrase today. We've talked about that already. It's also a collective responsibility, and everyone has a role to play. And I think this is really a crucial element to highlight, that the IASC has actually stated very clearly that failure to address GBV risks in any sector of humanitarian response is a failure to deliver on our basic humanitarian responsibilities, and sort of what we owe the populations that we're serving. So I think that, we've really come to a point where GBV risk mitigation is just a core component of do no harm, and it really is needed in order to be delivering our quality programming. So jumping into sort of a little bit more of a nutrition specific conversation. Why specifically do we think about a GBV in the context of nutrition programming? As I've already said, one reason is because we're mandated to do so. All sectors are mandated to do so. But specifically for nutrition, I think there are some important linkages that we want to pay attention to. One is that there's an increasing amount of evidence available, both through just sort of practitioner experience, but also through some more robust research that I'll share some in the next slide, that exposure to gender-based violence actually has implications for the nutrition outcomes that all of you are trying to achieve in your programming. So really, if we're not thinking about GBV in the way we design and deliver nutrition programming, we're not going to be getting the optimal outcomes that we're aiming for. Secondly, just across the board, we know that safer and more accessible programming means more effective service delivery. So if, the routes to and from a nutrition center are not safe, if there are attacks happening along the roads, we know that people are going to have a harder time getting there, and their ability to access the services and are going to be compromised. We also know that women and girl caregivers are the main users of nutrition services, and they also are disproportionately experience GBV. We know that even outside of emergency settings, 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence at some point in her life, and those risks increase in emergency settings. So the fact that women and girls are coming together in nutrition services, and even in locations where maybe we don't have GBV specialized services, sometimes those nutrition centers are the only place where women and girls can come together in a safe and protected location. And also that we know communities value nutrition services. Often they are seen as some of the most important and most trusted services that humanitarian actors provide. And so the levels of trust and the types of conversations that women and girls are having in nutrition centers can often create an environment where women and girls who are experiencing violence seek support from nutrition staff. And so, really recognizing that and helping to cultivate an environment where connection to referrals for GBV specialized services is possible is very important. So as I mentioned, the UNICEF recently commissioned a rapid evidence assessment to look at what type of evidence is out there in terms of exposure to GBV and both direct and indirect exposure to GBV and nutrition outcomes for children. And the way we define that is that the direct pathway was GBV perpetrated against a girl and then her actual individual nutrition outcomes. And the indirect pathway was GBV against a maternal caregiver and what that meant for her children's nutrition outcome. And out of the 84 published articles, some of the main findings highlighted that exposure to GBV was linked to low birth weight, breastfeeding practices, so less frequent immediate initiation of breastfeeding, but also early cessation of breastfeeding, and some of the key child growth indicators that nutrition pays attention to. So stunting, wasting, and underweight. Some of the potential pathways that are hypothesized, this is still a work in progress, but you know, they'll probably come to you anyway and kind of make sense logically. Maternal stress and mental health, and how the experience of GBV, you know, increases stress for the mother and therefore has implications for how capable she is of caring for her children. Also, just the general household environment and power dynamics, and to what extent she can actually make choices on what to feed her children, even if a nutrition facility or program is giving certain advice, to what extent she can actually follow it, given what else is going on in her household. And also coping mechanisms, you know, some of the coping mechanisms related to someone experiencing GBV and sort of needing to address their own immediate needs. Sometimes those are not the healthiest, right? They might be alcohol related or drug related. And so some of those coping mechanisms obviously have implications for an individual's ability to care for children. So these, as I said, are all kind of still being explored, and we have some additional plans for advancing this research further. So if you're interested in any of it, please do get in touch, and we'll be releasing the findings shortly. Other linkages, just sort of in terms of programmatic considerations. I touched on this first bullet point earlier in the presentation, but you know, for nutrition, I think it's really important that we're all on the same page that withholding food or preferential feeding based on gender is a form of GBV. So, you know, in households where boys are given additional food or fed first, or, you know, whatever the preferential feeding is, that, based on the definition that's used at the international level, is actually a form of gender-based violence. Gender and power dynamics in the home affect uptake of nutrition services. I think we've talked about that one a little bit, but I might just give a specific example. I do a lot of work in and with colleagues in South Sudan. And one of the things that we've been seeing there in a study that we have ongoing is that the uptake for stabilization centers is not as high as we'd like to see it. And that part of that is because husbands are not allowing their wives to stay overnight with the child. So the choice is kind of between having problems at home, perhaps being beaten at home, or, you know, staying overnight with the child to get the treatment that they need. And so, you know, kind of issues like that are what we mean for that bullet point. We also know that lack of food or lack of any access to any basic survival good or need leads to increased risks of harmful coping mechanisms and SEA. So, you know, could I just ask everybody to mute, please? Or I don't know if one of the organizers can mute. Oh, there we go. I think I managed. So sexual exploitation and abuse, and I'm sure you're familiar with this term, but essentially it's where someone in a position of power or with access to, you know, humanitarian assistance then uses that power, misuses that power to exploit or abuse someone sexually who needs the goods. So, oops, there we go with the issue again. Okay. And, you know, also thinking about program design and delivery for nutrition services. So the location and timing can have important implications for safety. I talked about that a little bit in terms of the safety of the routes to and from, but also, you know, if they're located next to a checkpoint, or if the timing of the opening of the center is so early that people have to walk for, you know, 4 or 5 hours or stand in a queue in the dark. All of these things, you know, have implications for GBV related risk. The community's understanding of nutrition programming, you know, what the criteria are, sometimes, especially within households where there are multiple families living together and maybe one family is eligible for a nutrition program and another is not. And so that can, create resentment and sometimes lead to violence if that's not clearly communicated. And also, I think this last one is really, really important. The opportunities for collaboration across the nutrition sector and the GBV sector, particularly when it comes to referrals. I mentioned that a nutrition center can be a place where GBV survivors seek support. And so, making sure that our nutrition frontline staff are equipped to provide the resources and the help in a safe and appropriate way. But on the flip side, I think, more and more I'm advocating within our GBV community that we also have work to do to make sure that our staff working in GBV programs, so things like Women and Girls Safe Spaces, etc., that we are equipped to provide referrals to nutrition services, perhaps do some basic screening if necessary. So I think there are some really exciting and interesting collaborations that we can continue to explore together. All right, oops, now my screen's not advancing. There we go. Okay, so advancing GBV risk analysis. I am not gonna go into a ton of detail on this because it takes time, but I am gonna introduce some of the main tools, and then hopefully if we have a few minutes, we can talk a little bit more about some of the typical risks that come up. Some of them I've already mentioned previously in the presentation, so hopefully that combination will be enough. But as I said, if people are interested in doing more of a deeper dive session specifically on GBV risk analysis, that's one of the ones that I like to do in a more focused way. So the useful types of information for GBV risk analysis include barriers to accessing services. So what we call the AAAQ framework: availability, accessibility, acceptability, and quality. I'll walk you through that on the next slide. Also, we have tools available now for gauging service users' perceptions of safety. So really, both qualitative and quantitative measures of how safe people feel in the facility, around the facility, when they get home after visiting the facility, etc. And also coping mechanisms, as I mentioned. Depending on the context, if you know what some of the coping mechanisms are when families are facing, shortages of basic goods, we can track those coping mechanisms and triangulate them with some of the other information available and use it as part of our GBV risk analysis. I put a website there, gbvguidelines.org, measuring effectiveness, where all of these tools are included, and there are also some additional articles and videos if you want to learn more about this. This one, I just always have to share my iceberg slide. Basically, a lot of times when people are just starting to think about GBV-related risks and GBV risk analysis, they think, oh, of course, we need to know how many incidents of GBV have been recorded. And for various reasons, this is not included in our analysis for GBV risk mitigation. There are a number of safety and ethical related issues to collecting this kind of data, but also we know that any data collection exercise, any numbers we're able to find out are only going to be the tip of the iceberg anyway. They're very easily misinterpreted numbers if you don't have other contextual information available, and they really don't tell us the information that we need to know for GBV risk mitigation. So again, if anyone's interested in doing a deeper dive into this or having some additional resources, I'm happy to share them. But in general, the take home that I'd like us to all be on the same page about for this session is that nutrition program staff should not be collecting GBV incident data. The AAAQ framework that I mentioned in 2 slides ago is sort of laid out here visually. As you can see, it has various categories. It covers both visible and invisible types of barriers. So, everything from like the physical barriers that you would think, I don't know, flooding or or a checkpoint or whatever else, to, you know, financial and bureaucratic. Do you have to be on a list somewhere? Who decides on who gets on that list, etc. So all of the questions related to these different categories are available there in that link that I shared. And other tools for Gbv risk analysis in nutrition that are currently available include a contextualized safety audit for nutrition facilities. This one was designed by ACF CARE and UNICEF in South Sudan and endorsed by the South Sudan cluster. For those of you not familiar with safety audits, or who hear the word audit and kind of have a panic because you think about, I don't know, something financial or your taxes or something. It's actually just a very simple sort of checklist for assessing safety considerations in a site. They were originally designed for kind of camp-like settings. So they looked at things like the locations of latrines, whether or not there's adequate lighting, how close together the shelters are, etc. But this tool has been adapted to the nutrition sector in South Sudan and is available for those who'd like to pick it up and apply it elsewhere. We have a tip sheet for conducting consultations with women and girls. This one, I think, should just be core to everything that we do in every sector and every intervention that we do in humanitarian response, is really, you know, within our M&E frameworks, within our processes, creating space to discuss with women and girls, you know, what their key concerns are and what their recommendations are for making programming safer. And that's there's a little how-to tip sheet there. And the last set of links is back to the Gbv guidelines website, measuring effectiveness and information management subpages. I will talk a little bit more about those after we do some Q&A. So if there are any questions now about sort of the material we've covered thus far, after this, I'm going to jump into programmatic examples. But if people have questions about just the general overview of risk mitigation or the risk analysis part, please feel free. And I think, I can't remember who was facilitating.
Yeah, hi, Christine.
Hey, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Great.
So there is one question in the chat that came about, and you can see if you want to answer it right now or whether it gets covered later. What the question is from Kadir, and he says, what elements of GBV should be addressed in the nutrition programming in the emergency context, like conflict, floods, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. We will cover a little bit of the programming in more detail after this Q&A. But I think generally what's been really interesting in the last year or so is that in some of the safety audits that we've done in various places, in some of the consultations with women and girls that we do about their safety concerns, often they mention flooding, right? And sometimes initially we were sort of thinking, okay, well, that's a safety risk, but it's kind of not necessarily a GBV safety risk. It's like a more general safety risk. But actually, when we dug a little deeper and spoke to women and girls more, it was actually very obvious that the linkages between flooding and GBV are more direct than we realized. As I mentioned before, if the flooding acts as a barrier to getting to the service, then that can mean additional GBV risks in the household. If it means it takes longer for a woman or girl who's accessing the nutrition service to get to the place she's trying to go and get back, you know, often we see that being gone for prolonged periods of time can increase suspicion within the household and lead to increased intimate partner violence. And also, one of the things that came up in the study that I mentioned in South Sudan is that when people are displaced to new locations that they're less familiar with, they don't necessarily know all the alternative routes and the pros and cons of those routes. So if their main route is blocked off, they might not know that the route that goes, you know, to the right versus the route that goes to the left as alternatives, that if one is safer than the other. And so one of the things we've been looking at in that context is, if and how we can pull together some information sharing about how to safely get to and from the facility. The information sharing between those who are more familiar with the community and those who are less familiar with the community. But I think, this question is a great one because it really emphasizes that there's kind of no cookie cutter answer. It all really depends on sort of what is happening in the context and what your Gbv risk analysis shows. So then you can do the programmatic response accordingly. I hope that answered the question, but if not, we can come back after the programming part of the session.
Great, thanks. Kadir, you can let us know if you have any follow-up questions to that. And there is one more, well, it's a question and a statement from Monica. She says, I was wondering if opportunities to develop integrated programs are also being explored, not only referrals. There's strong evidence about success of GBV protection areas working very well in integrated approaches with other sectors. Any thoughts?
Monica, please write to me. I want to have a conversation about this because this is something that I'm very interested in pursuing. I'm not aware of it happening in very many places or in a very focused way, but I think it has a ton of potential. Not only the referrals, but joint coordinated and or joint information sessions about nutrition, about GBV. I think there's just so much potential for our two sectors to work more closely together in an integrated way. So if you're up for it, please do reach out and we can brainstorm that further. Is there anything else?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm jumping in. Sona's computer's rebooting right now. So.
Oh shoot! What timing?
But that's okay. I think we're about to hand over to you.
Great
There weren't any other questions. There was an answered question from Colleen that Pamela answered about some resources. So if anyone wants to look there and can see those resources that are available. Other than that, I think we can hand over back to you, Christine, for the second session.
Fantastic. Thanks for dropping the link straight into the chat, Pam, and we will circulate this presentation that has all the links included as well, so they'll be available afterwards. Excellent. Okay, so shifting from kind of our general overview and our discussion on risk analysis, I'd now like to spend a few minutes just talking about, I should check my time. Okay, a few minutes just talking about some programmatic examples of GBV risk mitigation in the nutrition sector. So let's do that. First of all, sometimes we get asked, what is the role of nutrition program staff when it comes to GBV? And these two categories are ones that we tell colleagues working in all sectors that it's how their responsibilities are divided up. One is to proactively identify and address potential GBV related risks linked to your program. So really deliberately figure out what the potential GBV risks are and take actions within your program design, delivery, and M&E to weave in the mitigation measures. So that is the first one, and I'd say probably the bulk of it. The second one is being prepared to provide referrals to GBV response services if a survivor chooses to disclose their experience. So this one is really, I mentioned it before, but it's about making sure that frontline workers are aware of the available GBV services in the location where they're working, making sure that they're trained on some of the do's and don'ts for interacting with a survivor in a supportive way, and also making sure that everyone understands that none of the sectors that we work in, including nutrition, is meant to be proactively seeking out GBV survivors. We're not asking questions proactively about, have you experienced this? Do you know anyone who's experienced this, etc. It's much more about creating a supportive environment where if survivors want to come forward and share their story and ask for help, we're equipped to provide that. One small disclaimer, I suppose, about these two categories. As I mentioned, they are the go-to categories for all sectors. But I think Monica's question and some of the material I've covered already in the presentation, though, based on those, it's probably becoming obvious to you, in addition to the work that you do, that the nutrition sector is a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more of a gray area than some of the others. You know, like for example, wash sector interventions, they're pretty straightforward from a Gbv perspective. It's locks on latrines, it's making sure adequate lighting, it's making sure that, you know, men and women have separate places to shower, things like that. But we do see different models of nutrition programming that have kind of some overlaps with Gbv specialized programming, or where nutrition colleagues are working really, really closely with Gbv colleagues to, for example, maybe have a Gbv caseworker present in a nutrition site, or to have nutrition caseworkers do some, you know, regular visits to the women and girls safe spaces and have some informational sessions on nutrition, etc. So there are lots of things that are emerging that kind of go beyond these two simple categories when it comes to nutrition. But I do want to, you know, just continue to emphasize that as those options are being explored and as you're, you know, thinking about ways that you might approach them, it's really, really crucial that you're teaming up with Gbv specialists in some way, just to make sure that, you know, the interventions that we're putting forward are safe and that there are, you know, proper kind of safeguards built into the monitoring to ensure that if any unintended consequences come up, which we know can happen, that we're keeping track of them and that we're addressing. So the core resources for Gbv risk mitigation are screenshotted there on the slide, and also the hyperlink is up there for the Gbv guidelines website. The white book on the left is the guidelines for integrating gender-based violence interventions in humanitarian action. It's a really thick book if you have the entire thing with all of the chapters. But as you can see down the right-hand side of the page, there are sort of different color banners, and all of those represent an individual sector. So you're also able to access the material for your specific sector. In this case, nutrition is sort of the yellow-orange one, a little more than halfway down the bottom. And everything in that section, or what we call thematic, what do we call it? Thematic area guide, the tag. Everything there is geared towards the nutrition sector. But I know, you know, many of us work in agencies or organizations where we have programming in multiple sectors. So if this is the first time you're becoming aware of this resource, you could also, you know, recommend it to your education colleagues or health colleagues or others. And there's specific elements of the book just for them as well. Oh, and I'll say one more thing about this. The way that the Gbv guidelines are structured is by the program cycle. So it starts with assessments, and there are specific questions that can be woven into regular nutrition assessments to help make sure that Gbv risks are included in those assessments. There's resource mobilization, so tips on how you can weave Gbv risk mitigation considerations into your nutrition proposals. And you know, more and more we're seeing donors ask for that. So it's quite a practical section of the tag. I want to take a look at that. There's programming, there's coordination, and there's M&E. and the M&E part contains indicators that were sort of the latest and greatest in our thinking when this document came out 15 years, no, not 15 years ago, in 2015, which was 7 years ago. But since then, our thinking has really evolved. So for the sort of most up-to-date thinking on indicators, I would recommend using the website that I've listed there. The other resource on the right is what we call the Gbv Pocket Guide. And it is a resource, it's really tiny. It's like, I don't know, maybe 15 pages. And it's small. It's like, doesn't quite fit in your pocket, but it's maybe half of an A4 piece of paper. And it's available in PDF and also as a smartphone app. So you can search Gbv Pocket Guide, however you get your apps, and download it if you'd like to. Once you've downloaded the app, you don't need to have an internet connection in order to use it. And both the PDF and the app are available in, I think, close to 20 languages now. So that resource has been very much appreciated and very well used by colleagues in multiple sectors. And since Pam is on the line, I'm gonna weave in something that she always reminds me that we need to say, that even though the title of the document says when a Gbv actor is not available in your area, that was the initial sort of framing for this document and why we created it, because colleagues were saying, okay, you're telling me to refer to Gbv services if a survivor comes forward, but where I work, there are no Gbv services. So what do I do? So this was a resource that we developed for those types of situations. However, the content in it is really the best that we have for simple, straightforward information for anyone who would be providing a Gbv referral in any situation. So there's a decision tree that walks you through, you know, is there a referral pathway in my area, yes or no? The do's and don'ts on what to say, what not to say are exactly the same. So I would really recommend using it, even if you're working in a location where there's Gbv programming happening as well. So practical examples. I've highlighted one that we could go into in a little bit more detail. And if we have time, I mean, I'd love to hear from other colleagues on the line of what you're doing programmatically. But the one that I thought we would talk about is the nutrition safety audits that they've done in South Sudan. I've talked about them a little bit already. There's also additional information in the link at the bottom of this slide, including a recording by the team that actually is working on this, as well as links to the tools that they're using. So all of that you can look at in further detail after this session if you're interested. But basically, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the purpose of the safety audit is to identify potential Gbv risks or actual Gbv risks and use that information to plan and implement Gbv risk mitigation measures. So some of the things that came up in this safety audit exercise in South Sudan was a lack of female staff at the nutrition facilities. So, you know, I think we all know that HR is not the fastest element of our job most times. And if we need to make major changes like changing the proportion of male and female staff, you know, it's going to take some time. So in addition to the colleagues, you know, looking at what some of the options were for longer term, increasing the representation of females on the front lines of delivering nutrition programming, they also looked at some immediate efforts that could be taken to adjust current staff rotations and shifts to make sure that at least one female staff was present at all times. And what I really liked and continue to like about how they're approaching this in South Sudan is that they're also being really careful and thoughtful to create space for those female staff, some of whom, you know, there aren't very many of them in some of these locations, right? But to create space for them to voice, you know, their own preferences and what's going on for their own safety, right? Because in the example that I gave about with opening times for nutrition services. If we're going to have super early opening times and we're going to try and make sure that at least one female staff is present to be available for that first shift, the same safety concerns that that service users might face could also apply to female staff. So, you know, really building in some safety checks for our female staff as we're thinking about increasing the coverage of female staff is crucial. Some of the other things that came up were long distances traveled to reach nutrition sites. So, you know, people walking on foot for hours and hours, or even sometimes the better part of a day. So colleagues were looking into options like mobile services, working with local women's organizations to identify the most vulnerable in the communities and targeting them with home visits. So things like that. And again, all of these adapted modalities were paired with monitoring to make sure that any potential unintended consequences were not unintentionally increasing harm. So that if, you know, having, I don't know, a male nutrition worker show up at a woman's house who has a disability, even if he was, you know, acting completely professionally and not crossing any lines, perhaps that could create rumors or stigma within the community. So kind of keeping an eye on some of those things that might be unanticipated, unintended consequences was woven into the monitoring in quite a thoughtful way. Long waiting time at nutrition services. So I mentioned this previously as well. Sometimes we don't necessarily think of long queues as a GBV risk, but they definitely can be, right? Not only in terms of immediate safety considerations, depending on the security situation around a facility, but also, as I said, if a woman or a girl is gone for longer than the male head of household thinks that she should be, that can sometimes result in increased violence when she gets back home. So some of the risk mitigation measures that colleagues were considering to help alleviate that was increasing the number of days for nutrition activities, you know, so sort of spreading out when it was likely to have bigger crowds. And also, you know, weaving this into donor advocacy to say, look, we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have, but we really need to expand. Can you help us? Can you help us do that? Some additional risks that came up, safety concerns along the route. So flooding, attacks by armed youth, sometimes, you know, getting supplies taken after a distribution. So some of the risk mitigation measures that were put into place were advocacy with community leaders. I mentioned this one before, peer-to-peer information sessions regarding alternative routes to and from the facility. So sort of a bit of a geographic orientation for people who are newer to the community. And also, you know, really importantly, relaying the information that we're learning through our nutrition safety audits and other forms of monitoring to the protection sector, to our GBV colleagues, because, you know, they're the ones that are often doing a lot of the advocacy around access and things like that. So making sure that that information sharing is, there's a closed loop on that. Some of the issues coming up in the safety audits for nutrition were actually more sort of WASH focused. So the WASH facilities within the nutrition facility were seen to be, sorry, I'm just going to see about muting. Okay. We're seen to be, you know, suboptimal or potentially having safety concerns woven in. And so, you know, that information was used to collaborate with the WASH sector to improve those. So some of the examples included, you know, better doors, putting a more substantive roof on the top of the latrine so that if it rained, people would still be able to use it, putting like a bar so that access for people with disabilities would be more enhanced, things like that. Lack of knowledge on GBV and sexual exploitation and abuse among nutrition staff. This one we've talked about a lot already, but sometimes our frontline staff don't know about the codes of conduct, don't know that they're expected to uphold certain levels of conduct in relation to their interactions with affected communities. And so, you know, really making sure that everyone's on the same page about the code of conduct, signing it, getting trained on it, monitoring it, etc. And also training on the Gbv Pocket guide, what to do in case a survivor comes to you as a nutrition frontline staff, who you can refer to, what the do's and don'ts are. And also, this one, you know, kind of comes back to Monica's question as well, really thinking about how we can use nutrition sites to visually display the information on GBV referral pathways. So I've seen nutrition centers where they have a big printed poster of the GBV referral pathway or the hotline. I've seen pocket cards that are made available at the nutrition center that include the information about GBV available services. So, you know, there's lots of creative ways that can be integrated into nutrition programming, again, in collaboration with the Gbv colleagues in your area. This is a screenshot of some IYCF. Brooke, I know we don't call it that anymore. NYCN, is that right? I'm still kind of old school and I call it IYCF. But infant and young child feeding cards that were made, and it was, you know, part of a set of general cards covering a number of different nutrition topics, but this one incorporated child marriage as one component. So that's also something that can be considered as part of, you know, the community nutrition volunteers outreach, you know, if there are ways that some information about GBV services can be woven into the work that they do in communities, etc. And let's see, we have a few minutes, so I'd really love to hear if people have any examples from their own work that they'd like to share. And maybe you can just type in the chat if you want to come in and we can invite you to unmute. Has anybody tried GBV risk mitigation in your work and like to share an intervention that you've done?
I'm not seeing any raised hands, but participants, if you'd like to share some of your experience, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, etc. Type in the chat box.
Thanks, Brooke. Also, Brooke, Sona, others on the call, Pam, if you'd like to come in and share any examples that I haven't highlighted, please feel free as well.
I think Pam has already answered one of the questions. Maybe if you want to expand on that, Pam, which is about there's fear of self-security or fear of counterattack to report GBV, especially at communities with low literacy. Is there any approach or experience you can share with us to overcome this challenge? Pam, you've responded to this, but would you like to expand on that?
Thanks, Sona. So basically, this is one key aspect that we request our sector specialists, and this is what Christine highlighted earlier in terms of making sure that all our frontline humanitarian staff will have that capacity to be able to compassionately and safely receive disclosures of gender-based violence. And if there are available services in that particular geographical area, it's great if they have that up-to-date information on those existing service providers or services that they can provide that information to the GBV survivor. So as I highlighted in my response, a nutrition actor who has that level of trust from the community members, especially the women and girls, whether they're working in a stabilization center or OTPs, may be the most accessible and safest entry point for a survivor to seek help. So their role is really quite crucial.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Pam. And it seems like there's a, maybe people are just in listening and learning mode, which is also great. Maybe what I'll do is wrap up my slides and then we can get into the Q&A because I am seeing a lot in the chat and the Q&A. So this is I wouldn't say it's a comprehensive list because there's a lot out there, but in my opinion, these are kind of the core resources that I would recommend nutrition actors be familiar with when it comes to GBV risk mitigation. A lot of them we've already talked about, and there are links included in other parts of the presentation. But a couple that I haven't mentioned yet, one is the GBV risk mitigation knowledge hub. So on the IASC GBV guidelines page, there's a tab called the Knowledge Hub, and there you can filter, you can access, I mean, I don't know how many resources are on there now, close to 100. You can filter them based on language, based on country, based on sector, based on keywords. So there's lots of different ways you can kind of sift through what's in there and see if you find something that's relevant to you. And also the last bullet point, I'm trying to remember if it was last year. I think it was last year. As UNICEF, in our role as cluster lead agency for nutrition, WASH, education, and child protection, we created GBV integration toolkits for the humanitarian program cycle. And there's one, dedicated to nutrition that's available. So for those of you that are in, more of a coordination role involved in clusters, etc., there is that specific resource for you. And I think we'll talk about this later, but there's going to be another webinar specifically on the forthcoming HPC and directed at UNICEF. Sorry, I'm feeling tired. At nutrition clusters at the field level who want to think about, incorporating some of this into the next round of humanitarian needs overviews and humanitarian response plan. And that is all I have. I want to say a huge thank you. My email is there. Pam's email is there. We would love to hear from you with any, either feedback on the session or questions that you might have going forward. So I will hand over now, I believe, back to you, Brooke, and then we're going to have another round of Q&A after your next segment, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Over to you.
Yeah, so we have loads of questions for the next Q&A. So if everyone can make sure to stick with us, we have quite a bit to go over once this is done. So right now, we're just going to go over a brief overview of the technical support team with the Global Nutrition Cluster, just so we can help you identify where to find that specific support for your programming. Next slide, please. And for the sake of time, I think I'm going to skip this one and we can share it in an email. It's a short video, but I want to make sure we have quite a lot of question and answer. So if we can go to the next slide. then we can explain a little bit more how the technical support team works. So how we provide support of the technical support team is a group of advisors from different organizations, including UNICEF, who are able to provide support either remotely, so short, quick support via the help desk, for example. In-depth support can be either in country or remote. This is more kind of a longer support, 6 to 8 weeks, where the advisors work specifically with your teams in depth. And we also have a consultant roster, which is recommendations of technically vetted consultants, and we can help identify those consultants for your support needs. What we do within the technical support team is you can request, and by you, I mean absolutely anybody can request for any of that support. So next slide, please. We also have, as Christine had said, UNICEF specific technical support for all UNICEF-led clusters, including nutrition. So they have support remote and in country available from Pam, from Christine, etc. And that's the email. So there's a wide variety of support for GBV risk mitigation that is available. So through the technical support team and through contacting UNICEF directly. Next slide, please. So within technical support for gender GBV, we can have help desk support. And as I said, that's kind of quick questions, looking for specific resources, some sort of guidance or tools on gender GBV risk reduction, etc. Those are tend to be quite quick questions and quick answers, generally within a 24-hour answer or faster. And then we have in-depth support that can happen. So that can include capacity strengthening on gender transformative approaches and GBV risk reduction, integrating gender GBV risk reduction into nutrition programming, gender analysis studies, review, development of gender GBV policy, strategy, or action plan. Within this technical support, there's a wider working group that is able to, if it's a more complex situation, we have a wider working group and plenty of special of experts and advisors, etc., that we can draw upon. So no question is too small and no question is too big. Next slide, please. The way that you can request for that support, you go to the website, tanutritioncluster.net. You go up to that orange button on the top right-hand side. Next, if you click forward, Christine, then this request form comes up. Enter as much information as you can to help us kind of make sure we're guiding it to the right person to answer it. It's a very small team, so it will definitely eventually get to the right person. And then we'll get right back to you when it comes in. Next slide, please. The process for the support, if we just go ahead and click forward, you submit that request just as we showed. There's an initial scoping call with the technical support team. After that, we together determine the needs. So it's very much led by you. The best HR is identified. Usually that person is, we look for as local as possible, as regional as possible, etc., and find that expertise there. The technical support team then identifies the best funding, next step, and together we prepare for support. So it is led by you. It is to make sure that we are providing the best support for the exact needs that you have. So next, click ahead. It takes place with quality assurance. And finally, we have an evaluation and follow-up. So anyone is welcome to take part into this process. There's multiple funding streams So please do not let that deter you if that is a concern. So next slide, please. So now we'll go to Q&A, and there's quite a few really, really great questions for Christine and Pam and Sona, etc. So Sona, I'm going to hand over to you as the moderator of this section.
Great, thanks, Brooke, and thanks for going through that quickly. We do have a lot of questions. I think one of the questions is about whether the tool for GBV audit will be shared after the webinar. I think we'll be happy to share all the tools. And the recording will also be available right on the website. The next question is from Julianne. She says, sometimes it seems like GBV related risks are so deeply connected to gender roles in general that it seems like there's not much that can be done in a humanitarian short project. One example being decision-making related to household finances, which is a challenge in cash nutrition programming. Targeting the women to receive example vouchers may lead to domestic GBV. So any thoughts around that, Christine?
Yeah, thanks for the great question, and it is a tough one. You know, I think just generally in our humanitarian work, we run into situations like this all the time, right? Like, what is feasible given the scope of our interventions, the duration of our interventions, etc. I would encourage you to take a peek at the thematic area guide for nutrition of the GBV guidelines. There's some useful text around this that even if, you know, in a humanitarian setting, we're not able to shift all of the gender norms, we're not able to address all of the root causes, some of the decisions that we make, even in the design of our programming, you know, the fact that we have female staff on the front lines, the fact that we insist on community consultations or decision-making communities that are decision-making committees that are, you know, involve women or are exclusively comprised of women. I think all of those things are, if done in a safe and thoughtful way and designed in collaboration with the women of the affected community themselves, can, you know, move us closer to greater gender equality. I think the point specifically about decision making in the household is one that comes up quite a lot. And I think you're right to say that it, you know, shifting things like that takes longer than we often have in a humanitarian sort of cycle for a project. But I would, a couple reflections. I would, you know, really encourage everyone to think about if and how some of those questions can be woven into the consultations that we do with local women and girls, and also with our female staff on the front lines that are from the communities. Because often, you know, they have really simple but quite effective ideas on things, you know, that can work. So I think that would be my number one suggested starting point. And also, I can dig up another resource that we have. It's not sort of designed as a one pager or anything, but it's something that we've been using internally to help think through some of these challenges about, you know, what is feasible, what is out of our control, etc. And it's this model that I think was initially designed by a Danish Refugee Council, if I'm not mistaken. And it breaks down like different issues into different spheres. So there's sphere of control, that would be directly what it is that our program is capable of affecting. You know, so like the location of the nutrition center or the opening and closing times, right? Like those are all within the control of the staff. Then there's the sphere of influence. So issues that maybe we're not able to directly affect, but that we can connect with the right people who can hopefully affect and make improvements. And then there's the sphere of interest. which are things that, you know, we recognize that we don't have power to control, but that have implications for how we do our work. And so there's a really neat little graphic and some explanation of how to use that. And I'm hoping that as, you know, one of our next iterations of resources for GBV risk mitigation, that we can pull that together. But in the meantime, if it's of interest, we can certainly circulate what we have related to that approach. And if it's helpful, you know, please use it. I don't want to put you on the spot, Pam, but if you want to come in on any other reflections related to the gender transformative question, I think it's a really important one. So please feel free.
Before, Christine, before Pam comes in, can I just add a response to this particular question as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
Related to decision making on household finances, there is an approach which is the household dialogue approach. This was, I think, there's a manual available also done by Mercy Corps, which very systematically, shows how you can work with communities to dispel some of the negative gender norms and work towards a more equitable household decision making within the communities. So and that's a tool that's been, an approach that's been found, that has had evidence of success. So that's something that can be looked at as well. And I mean, especially for decision making at the household level, and not just with finances, but also other aspects of decision making that are currently not equal for women. So it works towards making all decision making at a household level, and sharing responsibilities both within the household and outside. And so it works on a much broader level as well. So I think that's a useful tool to look at as well. Sorry, maybe Pam, you can come in now for the next question.
Thanks, Christine and Sona. Just to add to what you've mentioned regarding to the query of Julian. Julian, that is an excellent question. And I think this is where we can really explore the opportunities as well as the lessons learned around strengthening the humanitarian and development linkages for nutrition, as well as for addressing more gender transformative approaches to gender-based violence prevention and response. And there are existing case studies coming out from Myanmar, Niger, and Afghanistan that looks at the humanitarian development linkages for nutrition sector. And I think a follow through for those case studies will be to outline precisely what you're mentioning in terms of how do you actually incorporate more gender transformative approaches in the multi-sectoral way that we address nutrition needs across that nexus or continuum. Thanks.
Okay. I think the next question is from Hattie, saying, out of interest, why should non-GBV specific programs not include screening questions that might support those needing more specialist support through trained GBV services or specialists?
Another great question, and one that we've been talking about within the GBV community for a long time, and also it comes up a lot with nutrition colleagues. I think just as a general rule, even within the GBV sector and within health services that are catered to women and would be equipped to provide GBV services directly, there's I would say not 100% consensus, but fairly general consensus that screening is not so appropriate in humanitarian response, and that really what we want to be promoting is a safe environment, an environment where trust is built in different ways, and creating as many entry points as possible for survivors to come forward voluntarily should they choose to. So absolutely, you know, making information available about the services, you know, even proactively sharing information with people. I mean, I wouldn't say we do it in a way that's like, you look like you need help, here's a number, right? But through, for example, some of the regular, you know, group nutrition sessions that are done, weaving in, you know, if you know anyone who needs help, here's where they can get it, and really just, you know, doing everything we can to increase the number of entry points and the support available based on voluntary disclosures as opposed to screening. As I said, not everyone feels 100% that way. Some people think there are opportunities to do screening in a more systematic way, but the general consensus in the humanitarian community is, you know, given the nature of our programming, given the short duration, given kind of the unpredictability of it, that, you know, we try to stay away from screening generally. Again, I'm happy to have others come in on that if you'd like to compliment or even correct anything I've said.
I think that's fine, unless someone else wants to come in. Maybe we can go on to the next question. We do have a couple of more questions. I mean, there's a question from Said, if the French version, I'm presuming, of the audit tool or other tools are available. I think a lot of tools are available in French, and maybe we can circulate that too when we circulate the list of resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The safety audit in particular, I'm not 100% sure, unless ACF colleagues know better than I do. The AAQ, the consultation tip sheet, the pocket guide, the Gbv guidelines, the HPC toolkit are all in French.
Okay. Okay. The next question is again from Said. He says, in nutrition projects, we often have intermediaries in the implementation in areas of armed conflict. So how do we take gender into account in this context? And that's perfect English, Said. You don't need to be sorry for the English.
So just so I understand, is it kind of how we encourage partners that we're subcontracting to have female staff on their front lines, or is it more about the safety considerations directly linked to being in a conflict area?
As I understand it, it is a little of both, probably, because it's intermediaries in areas of armed conflict. So, I mean, how do you take gender into account? Probably both for the staff and the communities.
Yeah.
But Said, please feel free to come in and explain it further. Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
Sorry, I realized I was starting and then maybe there was going to be additional clarification. I mean, I think, you know, it's tough, right? These contexts are often not at all easy and incredibly complex. And the last thing we want to do is put individuals at additional risk. So I think, again, it really comes back to talking to those who know the community and know the area best, and figuring out, you know, what measures are going to maximize safety, what's actually feasible, if there are opportunities to kind of get creative to deliver on some of this. Unfortunately, I wish I could say this is how you do it and just run with it, but that's sort of not how it works. I think applying some of these tools to the context, doing the risk analysis, doing the consultations, and then making a decision from there as a team that's familiar with the context is sort of the best advice I can give.
Great, thanks. If in case you have any follow-up question to that or would like to clarify your question, please do raise your hand, Said. There was one question in the chat from Kadir again. which says in some areas, communities identifying GBV issues are sensitive to culture. And how do we address the culturally sensitive issues during emergency within the short time?
Yeah, that's another tough one. And I think related to the one we talked about before with some of the gender norms and things. We obviously have to do so very carefully. And again, I think figuring out what is going to be appropriate and feasible through talking to the communities themselves, right? Figuring out if there's someone influential, a community leader or religious leader, or you know, a respected head of a local women's organization or something that, you know, you can partner with and start to have them be a spokesperson of some of these messages. You know, figure out how to sort of craft the message in a way that speaks to people, that aligns with their values, and you know, instead of sort of coming in as something from the outside and lecturing or scolding or anything like that. I think it is context by context, and I'm really excited to see this household dialogue approach that you mentioned, Sona, because I think there are a number of tools like that that are sort of more about helping to shift norms within communities. But it's another one where I wish I had a cookie cutter, but I don't.
Yeah, so true. And I think that there are other interventions also around involving, engaging religious leaders, which is, I mean, it needs to be tread cautiously, but there are instances where interventions with religious leaders have helped overcome some of the cultural barriers. So that's one way to go about it, but it's not just about sensitizing religious leaders. It's about engaging them in understanding how religion actually supports gender equality. And that's, I mean, it's a much more intensive process than only sensitizing religious leaders about it. So that's probably one way to also approach the cultural aspects, the cultural barriers. I don't see any more questions.
I think there's one in
there's
one in the chat about UNICEF structures that I can just touch on really quickly.
Sure.
So yes, it's true. Structurally, our GBV specialized programming sits under child protection. So in UNICEF country offices where we have a GBV specialist, they would sit in the child protection section. I'm at headquarters, I sit in child protection. However, as I mentioned, you know, UNICEF has made a commitment to integrate GBV into all of our sectors. So that's where the risk mitigation components come in. And we have, we generally have focal points in every programmatic section, including nutrition, to specifically, you know, help advance the GBV risk mitigation elements of the work in a specific sector.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. Brooke, you want to carry on? Yes.
Great. What a great Q&A. Oftentimes in webinars, we always find ourselves with a lot of questions and not enough time to answer. So I appreciate all the engagement and all of the incredible questions. And thanks, Christine and Sona and Pam for answering. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email. We have a next step. If we go forward in the slide, there's when you exit this webinar, a brief less than 5 minutes evaluation will pop up. From that, we will be able to take your feedback and create additional webinars similar to this one, or other topics that you see as important. That this webinar came up from suggestions from that very evaluation. So please, please do take the time so that we can make these better and more appropriate for you and your needs. We are here to serve and support all of you out in the front lines and all of you who are creating the programs and etc. So we are here for you. So please do give us that feedback. And thank you for a really great webinar. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Sona. Thank you, everybody who had some great engagement. Very, very much appreciated. So we will speak to you again soon. The next webinar is the HRP webinar process, sorry, the HRP process in 1 week's time. So 1 week from now. So we look forward to seeing you all again there. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you.